Good morning, guys. Welcome to the podcast. Happy New Year. I'm really happy to have Shayna Davis on the show. She's from Dallas and she helps women turn visibility into profitability and influence into lasting legacy. I'm really happy to have her on, especially for the female listening or watching. And I'm really happy to pick her brain. So, Shayna, welcome.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here, Christopher. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and briefly introduce yourself. And we're gonna dive right in.
Absolutely. As you said, I'm Shayna Davis. Many people know me as Shayna Rattler. I got married just a handful of months ago, but I am an income and influence strategist, and I help primarily women to succeed in what I call the influence economy.
Yeah, yeah, and that's interesting. The influence economy. I'm always in the marketplace for new ideas in terms. How is for people that are just first starting or tuning in? Tell them what the influence economy is, the creator economy, the attention economy. Talk about that.
Absolutely. So for me, the influence economy, and it's something that I coined this phrase, it's where visibility intersects with intentionality. And it creates lasting results like life-changing income, bigger opportunities, and a legacy. And what it's really about, Christopher, is recognizing that your influence is actually a currency. But unfortunately, many of us are not cashing it in. And if you think about like the digital first world that we live in today, influence is so powerful because it's not just for celebrities anymore. So entrepreneurs, thought leaders, creators, professionals can actually harness it to be able to shape industries and also be able to create really good financial success.
Mm, yeah, I think the very first, I think Gary Vee was one of the very kind of pioneers in this. He saw the power of social media,
Yeah.
and since then, creators have used social media. But I was talking with one of my colleagues, and interesting. I was reading that a lot of kids these days, like they don't want to be firefighter, policeman, president, doctors. They want to be social media stars. So it's very interesting. Yeah, moving on. So, first question I have for you is you talk about visibility to profitability. And so, what are actionable strategies professionals and creators can use to turn visibility into sustainable profitability?
Yeah. I want to first really point out like there are so many people that have influence and they have visibility, but the reason why they don't have the profitability is because they lack a clear strategy. I like to say that visibility and influence without a strategy is like having a treasure chest that you don't know how to open. And it can be really frustrating. You said you have a lot of women listeners, they're doctors, they're entrepreneurs, and we can become accustomed of making really good money from our trade and of our craft. But when we decide to step out in a different area, we're like, wait a minute, like I'm being seen, but I'm not necessarily being paid. I know I have impact and influence, but when I look at my bank account, why is it that is not really translating into profitability? And I think it's because we have to have a clear strategy. And the strategy that I recommend, and we can talk more about the how, but I first just wanted to talk about the what, is it's about merging your influence with a monetization strategy that builds like what I call an ecosystem around your influence. And what I recommend, I honestly believe, and I don't just say this because I host a podcast myself, but I honestly believe that the most effective strategy for anyone who has influence is to build an empire with a podcast at the center. I think every single person who has a message should have a podcast. Why? Because it is the modern day vehicle for massive reach and unlimited income. But so many people that have a podcast are not really making a lot of money from the podcast. And so, what I recommend people do to really monetize and maximize their influence, Christopher, is that they have a podcast, but they really build an ecosystem around the podcast that elevates their income. I call it the high five. You start with a podcast because it helps you to build authority, it helps you to build loyalty with your audience. But you look at how you use that podcast as a magnet for what I call the high five. It's corporate contracts, sponsorships, major media appearances, high paid speaking engagements, and book deals. Because again, when you think about a podcast, yeah, you can have some ads on there, you can send people to your product or your course. But most of the people who have really made a lot of money from podcasting, especially high six and seven figures, it's because they've mastered how to use the podcast as a vehicle to really bring their visibility into profitability. And so the very first thing that I say is recognize that if you have a message, you should have a podcast. And if you're going to have a podcast, you really need to look at how do you build an ecosystem around it, because that's where your income is really going to elevate.
Interesting. A lot of people listening, because I really believe because I love podcasting because it's still early and I want to be the first one in something that's very early. But people are saying, why podcasting as opposed to, for example, a newsletter? And I'm gonna ask you about YouTube, but talk about why podcasting outshines all the other mediums.
It is a booming industry right now, and it's not going anywhere. Just like if you think about social media, when social media first came out, they were telling us we had to use it, but we weren't sure if we really wanted to use it. I don't know if I want to be out there like that, but it's not going anywhere. And it's the same thing with podcasting. There are more people. It's the modern day media vehicle. More people are listening to or watching podcasts, depending on what format it is, than they're watching television, then they're watching streaming, then they're consuming any other form of content or media. They're turning to podcast for entertainment. They're turning to podcast for education, for inspiration. Like it's just where everyone is. And so if you want to think about what's effective, when we were growing up, this hit me like a ton of bricks about a year ago. When we were kids, we were always told, don't get in the traffic or else you're going to get hit. If you're in business, you've got to get in the traffic so that you can get hit. All of the traffic right now is on podcasting. So, yeah, you can have a newsletter. I have a newsletter. You can have a lot of different things, but where's the traffic? The traffic is currently in podcasting. And if you have a message, if you're impacting people with your message and your expertise, there's no better place right now. And I think going forward, even more. The last time I checked, there were 3.8 billion podcasts in the world. And the only reason I knew that was because when someone was like, your podcast is in the top 3% out of it, I was like, wait a minute, what? You know what I mean? So that it's just the place to be, and it's not going anywhere. It's only going to get better. And it helps you to not only build authority, but it's a great way to build loyalty and actually showcase your experience as well. It's almost like you being able to be on a stage over and over again for people to try you out and see what you're about before you ask them to take the next step with you.
Yeah. A follow-up question I have for you is, where does YouTube fit into all of this?
The way I use YouTube with my podcast is that I put the video version of my podcast on YouTube. So I don't see YouTube as any different. I don't put a lot of other videos out on my YouTube, but I use YouTube as the video distribution channel for my podcast.
Mhm. And on that same note, because another statistic that I was interesting was a lot of people are video short form. And how do you compete? How does audio compete with video?
It doesn't. But
It,
but you have to have both, right? Because last year, Apple Podcast has a video component to it now, but many of the other ones that are popular don't necessarily have a video component. So I put the audio everywhere that can be audio only, and then I put the video in places that you can have video. But more people are going, we talk about attention. More people are going to pay attention to video longer than they will audio because it engages more of their senses.
Mhm. It's interesting. Yeah, it's always, and plus you're reaching different segments, and it's a lot of ways to increase your brand reach and exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the high five, which I really can you share, don't spill the secret sauce, but some of your strategies for securing sponsors, partnerships, major
Yeah.
business deals?
Most of us are experts in some kind of way or another. I talked about if you have a message or you have expertise, these are the opportunities that are waiting for you. But one of the biggest things that you can do is brand yourself beyond your industry. Because if you're offering something for the B2C, meaning business directly to consumer, that may not necessarily translate into a big company or an organization's needs. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the master arena that I operate in? I'll use myself for example. I have a course called Make Millions Podcasting. It's for people who have influence, who want to have a show, and they want to learn how to get the high five. A corporation is not going to necessarily bring me in to teach their people how to have a podcast. But what they will do is if you think about what my brand is at the end of the day, my master arena is influence. So even though in the business to consumer world, I work with influential women, teaching them how to turn their influence into income, I can work with a corporation that wants to bring me in to work with their women leaders on how they use their influence to be more impactful with the teams that they're leading. How do they turn their brand as an executive into more visibility for the organization? So I want everybody who's listening to think, regardless of what I'm doing now, how do I brand myself in a master arena? What is the bigger, more mass market appeal to what it is that I do? Because when you can do, that's when you really position yourself well for major news outlets to reach out to you. They could come to me and say, hey, it's National Women's Month. I think that's March. Don't kill me if it's not. I want you to come on and talk about how women can own their influence, how they can find their voice and own their influence. It's National whatever month. I want you to come on and talk about influence. And so that is the number one thing that is going to position you to be able to align with partners, align with sponsors. It's going to help you get book deals. It's going to help corporations see how you can help them. Yes, you're an expert, but we've got to begin to think more broadly beyond what we're doing now if we really want to go after those things that we know we were born for.
I really resonate with your type of thinking, and especially from the standpoint of the sponsored partnerships, but also as broader, because originally this podcast was position only, very specific.
Yeah.
And then I brought it in out and that's when I was starting to secure the big deals. But it's quite interesting because people say niche down, focus down, niches, the riches are in the niches. So how do you address that?
Yeah. It just depends on what you're doing. If your goals are here's a statistic that many people know, but they don't know the full statistic. There used to be a statistic, and it may be 3% now, but a couple of years ago, it said that only 2% of small business owners ever break the $1 million mark. Of those that do, 56% of their sales comes from corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you can niche down and say, I'm only going to sell pencils to people that are in this zip code. And if you master a whole lot of things, you may be able to do well. However, if you will begin to brand yourself beyond your industry and create what my mentor calls a legacy brand, then you're going to be able to secure more large opportunities and you don't have to have as many of them. So yes, there are riches in the niches. However, if you really want to open yourself up to big opportunities, you're going to have to, and listen, I still, in the right circles, only talk about Make Millions podcasting. But if you want to look at my brand in general, I can't only focus on how you use podcasting as a way to maximize your influence and turn it into income, because I don't only want to swim in the business to consumer market. I also want to get large checks from big organizations. And the only way that I can do that, now here's the thing, it's still a niche. I'm not saying I can help anyone and any organization do better. No, I'm still niching down to influence. Influence is just broad enough that it has mass market appeal and is not just going to be in one lane.
Yeah, interesting. Another question, because you mentioned TV and radio, and quite honestly, I haven't, I can't even remember last time I watched like TV,
Right.
media. So is there something better? Like everybody's get on the TV, get on the TV. Is that kind of an old cliche, or is there, because now if you look at what Trump did, he went on the biggest podcast. He didn't go on media, he went on podcasts and got interviewed on Twitter. So talk about that.
Yeah. So the first part of that goes back to your question of like, why should we have a podcast? If the president of the United States, in however many days until he gets in, if the president of the United States said, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to start using that. If the president of the United States said, if I want to gain visibility and I want to get traction, I should be on podcasts, then doggone it, you should too. However, media still has its place, right? There's news outlets that still reach large numbers of people. You have places like CNN, MSNBC, News Nation that still reach massive amounts of people. But you know what most of those news stations also have, or the main anchors on their shows also have? Podcasts. And the reason why I say that is because I could be working with one of the commentators on one of the major media outlets, and they may stream our interview out to their traditional media on television or streaming app, wherever they're at. They may put it on their podcast. They may have it. I'm use News Nation for an example. That's where I get my news. I read my News Nation newsletter every single morning, and some of the stories that they feature on the podcast and on the actual, it's not a television show, but on the news station
Yeah.
also come to the news, also come to the newsletter, which is why if you look at my bio and when you look at what I'm talking about building, that's why I call it that you should be building a multimedia empire, because you shouldn't just look at being on one form of media. Nobody else is doing that. If the major media outlets also have podcasts, also have newsletters, also have all the things, I think we should as well. If we have some level of influence, I believe that's what we should do as well. Clearly, it's working.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just studying the top social media influencers, what they're doing, looking at media in general. What you're talking about is study media, study influence, and utilize those tactics and strategies.
The problem, Christopher, is that especially when you look at the high five, most people are not teaching how to get your foot in the door with those five things. And
Mm.
the ones that are, many of them, what they're saying doesn't work, or they're doing it in a very old, antiquated way. And I can tell you this because when I look at the high five, the contracts, the sponsorships, the media, the book deals, and the speaking engagements, I've been doing those things for decades. But it's so much easier for me to secure those high five now that I have a podcast. It's so much easier for me
Yeah.
to identify decision makers at a corporation and get my foot in the door to build the relationship and get the contracts now that I have a podcast than it was when I was having to do things the old way. So there's not a lot of people that are out there that are doing it and know how to teach other people how to do it in an effective way, which is why most people are like, that sounds good, but I wouldn't even know where to start. Talk about a
Yeah.
high five. Like, I wouldn't know where to start. Like, what's that? You high five?
Yeah. Which we talked about. We talked about social media, and one thing I want to pick your brain on is because I saw another post on TikTok the other day, and she was saying that she has very little following, but she makes six figures. And talk about strategically using social media. And I know because if you have like millions of followers, it's like social proof. Having followers is important. So talk about that dichotomy.
Having followers is important, but visibility does not always equal profitability. I can guarantee you anyone who is effective in social media, anyone who is effective in podcasting or whatever the medium is, right? They're all just vehicles. Most people who are financially successful in any of these marketing vehicles, it's because they're driving their viewers or their followers or their audience, pick whatever it is that you're referring to, something that they sell, to their products and courses, to their merchandise. There's things that they're selling, which, if you remember, I said you should look at building an ecosystem around what your platform is, because that's what really elevates your income. Most of the people who are on social media that brands are paying them to like share about my supplement and why it's so great, very few people are making life-changing income from that. But
Yeah.
most of the people who are on TikTok, they also have another way that you can pay them, which is this ecosystem that I'm recommending that you do. The most effective strategy is going to be to build an ecosystem. Now, the only reason that I don't include products and services in my high five is because I don't teach that. I could, I do have products and courses myself, but I'm not trying to become known for somebody that teaches you how to do products and courses. I partner with people for that. But yeah, anything works if you work it. But if you think that you're going to make a lot of money just from the medium itself, there's very few people that are doing that successfully. Not impossible, but very few people are doing that successfully.
Yeah, I love your thinking. How can people find you and reach out to you? And because I really love this interview and it really resonated. And I know you're empowering women entrepreneurs.
Anyone that wants to learn more about what it is that I'm talking about can follow me on social media. And I'm Shana Rattler Davis on both Instagram and Facebook. If a woman is listening to this, I really recommend that they take my influence growth assessment because it's going to pinpoint exactly where you are on your influence journey and give you the next steps to get real results. And you can get that at myinfluencestyle.com.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on and Happy New Year. Wishing you continued success and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.